product manager at Conde Nast, and today I'm kind of going to be sharing some insights into the digital initiatives that are happening at Condé currently, and then what are what it's like to be a product manager for Vogue. So I think, unlike being, say, a product manager for a shortage-based startup or a tech giant, there are some unique challenges that come with being a product manager for what is a 100-plus, legacy brand with a lot of heritage, but trying really hard to begin to modernize itself. So I'm going to be kind of sharing lessons that I've learned and kind of how to overcome those challenges. So I guess before we get started, who's heard of Conde Nast before? Okay, so everyone, more or less. We're a global publishing giant, so we're responsible for most of the magazines that you'll see on the newsstand, so Wired, GQ, Vogue. And just running through some numbers at Condé, so there's 143 magazines in total. That's over 144 million readers across 29 countries. That's over 100 websites with almost 435 million visitors monthly. So this is just a recent quote out of I think it was a New York Times article by Wolfgang, who is our president of CNI. And it kind of depicts, so Condé is going through a really interesting time. Up until very recently, it was a very decentralized company. So you have, for instance, Vogue Italy. There's absolutely no relationship with Vogue Italy versus Vogue US versus Vogue Mexico. So I think to a user perspective, they see Vogue as being Vogue and this global brand, but actually, every Vogue more or less is quite autonomous in the way that they work. And now we're going towards this, what Wolfgang referred to as this extreme centralization. And there's quite a few good reasons for why we're undergoing centralization. I mean, for one, we have a whole ton of websites. So again, that's 100 in total. Each of them have a completely different experience. So even say across GQ, US will be completely different to the British GQ, for instance. And then all of them are backed by completely different content management systems and the such. Oh, and data. So commercial data, traffic, I mean, we've spent nearly, I would say, the last 2 years even trying to bring that together. So up until recently, there was no way of saying, of looking across, all the GQ websites and observing what the user behavior was. That just wasn't available. So then you have something like, and this is what my team is working on. You have something like 25 Vogues that, so fashion shows are at the heart of the Vogue DNA brand. And you have 25 different Vogues independently covering, uploading, publishing hundreds of the same fashion shows each year. So we're talking about the same data set. So it's the images of the models coming down the runway. You have things such as brand name, season name, the city in which the show took place. And if I can think in a year, that's roughly something like over 1,000 fashion shows. So you have each market uploading the same 1,000-something show base each year. So and it's worth also saying that it's extremely time consuming. It's a very manual process. It takes up a lot of the time in each editorial team. You have a market, say Vogue Italy, who wants to offer their users coverage, local coverage pertaining to maybe Seoul Fashion Week or Tokyo Fashion Week, but they just can't provide that because the bandwidth is not there, or usually it's about bandwidth. But anyway, so one of the initiatives that my team has been involved with is creating a centralized fashion show team. So very soon, and we've already started rolling this out, but very soon we have one centralized team here in our London headquarters, and they are essentially responsible for covering fashion shows on behalf of all markets. And this means that we have a centralized archive base. So again, every Vogue, its own archive, and now we're kind of bringing that together to create a centralized one. And my team helps kind of build the tools around all this activity. So both from a back-end perspective and then the front-end consumer experience as well. So yeah, again, that's over, you're talking over 100,000 images across each market. That's a bit insane. So I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk a bit about the challenges and kind of the lessons I've learned around PMing and publishing. So the one, perhaps the main challenge is that before product managers, there were editors. Editors, for the most part, dictated product decisions. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense in terms of, you have these editors, a lot of whom which have been around for decades, and they've pretty much built these glossy magazines that they have their name behind. So yeah, that's. I mean, now of course we have, product teams embedded in titles and such, but in the same way that the editor-in-chief kind of decides the tone of the magazine, and of course that has proven to be very successful for Condé. I would say in terms of the products, it's sort of a similar trend. It takes, that influence is very much present in those products.
And does the product team work alongside the editorial team, or is it somehow centralized so they are reporting into you?
No, so we very much, so in terms of, I can't speak for the other markets, but at the C&I headquarters, we very much work with the editorial teams. So it's a joint with them, yeah. The idea is that it's with. This one's also a big one. So the concept of MVP is quite foreign in publishing. So again, if you think about a magazine, they're meticulously crafted, every single detail, and then that monthly issue goes out, and then that's it. You can't go back, change something, you can't iterate on that same issue. So as a product manager, sometimes you find yourself in kind of difficult positions with your stakeholders where they will expect every single bell and whistle latched onto that product before it even reaches the user. And of course, you're a PM that's kind of desperately trying to get your product out the door because you just want the users to start engaging with it. So then you get some data, you start understanding how users are reacting to your product. But again, this is definitely a different approach than how you go about creating and releasing a magazine, say. So this one might not be unique to publishing per se, but we do make a lot of assumptions about our users. So we think we are users in some cases, so that we don't have to reach out too far to understand them. So if you work at, say, Vogue Runway, I'm the consumer of that content, and therefore it's very easy to make assumptions. I had a stakeholder once tell me that 80% of the time, sure, we should listen to UX and what the data says, but then the other 20% of the time, let's actually follow the editor's gut feeling. And it's almost this assumption that we know what's best for the user. And of course, what ends up happening is that you build products that weren't founded on true user needs. So some of the lessons that I've learned. Lesson 1, don't assume that everyone understands your role in product. So this might not be an issue for, say, anyone working at a tech giant or a shortage-based startup. But it took me a while in my role to actually realize that there are few people stakeholders that I was working with that actually didn't understand the role of product. They assumed that a product actually is more akin to a project manager, or that our reasoning for being there is gathering requirements and fulfilling people's wish lists, and purely just prioritizing them and getting them out the door. And of course, that's not the role of a product manager. We're looking to at various sources to gather evidence and then help, in gathering that evidence, making informed decisions. But yeah, that was definitely a surprise to me. The second lesson is, so when you are gathering that evidence, involve your stakeholders in that process. And I would say especially stakeholders that tend to be more difficult. So if you're experiencing difficulty in having to justify why you're justifying the objectives or the priorities, pull those stakeholders into your world. So show them the UX research that you've used to help inform the decisions that you're making. Show them the data. Very recently at Condé, we launched quite a substantial kind of UX research, which is going on for, I think, just over a month. And the way that we kicked off this research is formed like a cross-functional team around it. So from day one, you have a developer, you have someone from editorial, someone from design, UX, etc. And then at various points in the research stage, you would have almost like these check-in points, so that stakeholders or anyone really interested in having to hear what the research is producing can kind of come in and absorb that info. And the turnout surprisingly was really great. And of course, this is not, we do UX research all the time, but the difference is that it went from happening behind closed doors and something that just product teams were involved in to having it be much more, much more open and involving more teams, so being more interdisciplinary, which we've seen has so far proven to work really well. And another thing, so yeah, if you have them with you on that journey from the start, then I think down the line it makes alignment much easier in terms of working with the different teams. So the third lesson is never take your users for granted, no matter what your position in the market. So I think especially working for a legacy company and a really powerful powerful brand, I can't speak today, like Vogue, it's easy to do this, and it's easy that you're going to remain the best, and users will continue to come to you and consume your product, and that's simply not the case. And how I try to combat this in my day-to-day role is I envision myself actually working for a startup company. So, a company who is, is or should be obsessed with the user and making sure that all the decisions that are kind of, the data decisions that you're making, you're constantly checking in and making sure, like, is this going to serve my user? Is this going to help increase loyalty, engagement? And not taking a passive kind of position, which I think that's a trap that you can fall into working with a powerful brand. And the second last lesson, I think, is developing a strong product culture is key. So I think it's important to define what product means in your organization and be able to share that message internally. So again, also helping with difficult stakeholders who may not have ever worked with a product team before. And And then that will also help them understand what methods you adopt and why. So, choosing to work agile and lean instead of working waterfall. And then they'll be, once they start to hear that message over and over again, hopefully that helps to also reduce the noise around. So the challenge that I mentioned before about, a stakeholder being like, why don't you have X, Y, and Z feature before you've chosen to launch it for the first time? Helping everyone understand the way that the product teams have decided to set up themselves and to work, helps with that. And then finally, it's an evolution, not a revolution. So contrary to the title of this slide and kind of what most people describe as happening in Condé as it's this being a revolution, actually I think it's going to be more of an evolution, and that typically is the case when it comes to big corporations, companies undergoing change. If your company for the longest time, so at Condé, more or less, I would say over 70% of our revenue comes from ads. You can't just come in as a PM and be like, we're going to, revolutionize our websites, and we're going to take down these ads, and we're going to, make the user experience far better. It is going to take time to adjust. You have, while I like to think of it as working on the present, trying to make that better, but then also thinking about long-term other monetization strategies down the line, and then bringing those into fruition slowly. And I think change doesn't happen overnight. Especially I don't think for a legacy company like Conde Nast. And if you want to see that change, you got to be in it for the long game, basically. And that's it. That's all I have so far. Is there any questions? We do in the US and we do in the markets. And again, up until recently, that was each market kind of working on its own project, but it's not it's not centralized, or it's not rolled out past the titles of that specific market. So sorry, when I say market, I mean France, and then in France you have Vogue Paris, you have GQ, etc. So yeah, it's still very concentrated. So we have a central data team at CNI, and their job right now is to kind of start to consolidate and bring all that data together. And by centralizing all of the websites onto one platform, then that's when exactly. And now we're starting to see that data come through across multiple brands and multiple markets. Yeah.
What sort of tools would you use on a day-to-day basis for, as a product manager?
So currently we use, and I don't know if this is what you're going for or not, so we use Clubhouse for our Scrum boards. We use Jira for support. We use GA. Yeah.
And actually, a separate question to
Yeah.
So you were very sort of adamant about the differences between product manager and a project manager.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if you could sort of elaborate on that a bit. I mean, if you're a product manager, you're going to need, if you're not doing it yourself, you're going to need project resources for delivery, otherwise it's not going to happen. So,
yeah.
How that breaks down.
Yeah, so currently in every kind of, so we have cross-functional teams at Conde Nast, and each team you either have a delivery lead or you have a project manager. The difference between, so I can think of an example today, for instance, between a product manager and a project manager. So I was having this conversation with my project manager, and I was really stressing out today because the way in which we're launching a particular product, I had doubts about. I had doubts about the strategy and whether that was going to help with engagement, help with expanding our user segments, and she turned and, I was telling her all my thoughts, and at the end of it, she was like, well, you know me, I don't really care as long as we deliver something. And she's an amazing project manager, don't get me wrong, but that's the difference. It's like a product manager goes home at the end of the night. If you're working on a product, it's up to the PM to decide what the strategy is for the product and how you're going to build that product out, what the roadmap looks like. For a delivery lead or a project manager, they don't have to worry about that at night as long as they're reaching the team is reaching the deadlines that they've set. Yeah. Does that help clarify?
I mean, maybe it depends on the size of the project team, but in a small team, then a project manager, to my eye at least, might be doing some of the role of a product manager as well.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, I can imagine in a startup, for instance, you would have a product manager that would oversee all those project tasks. But I don't think you can have a. Pardon?
And makes the tea.
Yeah. But I don't think you can have. So yeah, you can have the product manager also be the project manager, but I don't think you can just have a project manager, if that makes sense. Because then that means that there's someone else making the product decisions.
Can you talk us through the UX research that you mentioned, so where you're involved?
Yeah, sure.
Can you talk us through how you decided to do that, and how is that different to how you normally do it, and why you chose to do that in that particular way?
Yeah, so I guess how we normally do it is so a need will pop up. We need to answer this question, or we need to do research around this particular topic. And then the UX team usually carries that research from start to finish with the product manager kind of, tapping in and out. But this time it was different in the sense that we decided to set up a cross-functional team from the start. So we decided to have a developer there from the start, a design representative, strategy, commercial, data. And we've recently kicked it off, so I think it's only been two or 3 weeks maybe. But even like the kickoff session that we had, it really brought in viewpoints from other parts of the business that we otherwise wouldn't have heard of, because in
what capacity would you say the developers contribute to the commercial side?
So at the moment, we're mainly in the ideation stage, but the way that we plan for this research to kind of kick off is to have like a sprint-based approach. So actually, as the outputs start coming out from the research that we're doing, we'll start to kind of test and prototype different ideas, and then that's what the developer will be there for, is to make sure that these crazy ideas that might be thrown around are how practical they are. And of course, bringing in that technical knowledge that otherwise isn't there. And then what you end up with is maybe a bunch of product managers and UXers sitting there and thinking, oh, this is going to be a great idea, and we can, and you get to the very end, and actually, insight from a developer or insight from someone in the commercial team actually would have been really useful at the beginning, and that might have steered the project in a different direction, if that makes sense.
So it's basically referring to the Google sprints that they design sprints.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And how often do you speak to users?
How often do we speak to users? So within the fashion shows team, we try to do that pretty regularly. So we have what we have a set of users that consume Vogue content that we constantly refer back to. That's more of with the data and research team. And then within, so I lead up the fashion shows team. Within our team, we try to do litmus testing once every month We tend to do user interviews on an ad hoc basis, but we try to do it quite regularly. Yeah. Sorry.
You mentioned you have some challenges in terms of like other areas of the organization, understanding, what your accountability is, I guess, in terms of product management, that you were not there necessarily just to take on the requirements.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite a common thing to happen, and I've certainly been in many scenarios where that is. So how did you kind of, what did you do to sort of help you get over that and actually take that accountability to say, actually, yes, I know the strategy, I'm sort of going to help shape that, and we know what direction we need to take from a product management perspective?
Yeah, many conversations, so that's why I think going back to the point about developing a strong product culture is key, and sharing that message internally. That's not the kind of conversation that you have once with a person and then they go away absorbing that, and it's like, oh great, I see now. It definitely takes time, and actually it's something that, to this day I'm still combating. I think that, sometimes with some stakeholders, it's almost fear of missing out. It's them feeling they have a perception that they might be less empowered. And actually, if you're a product manager that does your job well, then you are doing the right thing commercially, you're doing the right thing editorially, and of course it's a balance, it's not perfect across the board, but just making sure. So what we've tried to do is, again, like with the research, engage the stakeholders a bit more, have them see it, have them, I don't know, even come to our agile ceremonies, for instance. When we started the product demos at CNI, it was just within the product team, and we extended, and so my team was actually the first team to extend an invite onto the editors, and now editorial teams make up a sizable portion of that audience. We have a product demo every 2 weeks. And then once they feel like they have access, and once they feel like they have visibility, and actually they are empowered to come up to your team and mention X, Y, and Z, and they feel like that their input is valid and it's being taken into consideration, I think all those factors kind of help in the long run.
To build that culture and, I guess, trust.
Yeah, trust, yeah. Yeah, you've summarized everything I said for 5 minutes into one word, but yeah, trust. Yeah. Pardon?
Are you going to introduce
So Conde Nast US recently announced that, for people, I'm not sure if you know, but there used to be Conde Nast International, which is rest of world, and Conde Nast US, which actually up until very recently were two different companies. So we've since merged, but the decision has been made, I think, for all the US titles to go up, to have a paywall by the end of this year. But I can't comment on the US publications.
How far are you into the centralization of the CMS journey, and what would you say your biggest challenge is?
So if I put a percentage on it, maybe 25% through, 25, 30. The biggest challenge, I think, is, so I touched on it early in their presentation, but up until very recently, each brand was truly autonomous, and there was no kind of relationship between, up until this year, the Conde Nast International headquarters, it was the first time they've gone out to some of these markets, and announcing to a market, hey, we're going to centralize everything and bringing everyone onto one platform, but also, we're the new kids on the block, and we've just met you, and you guys have been doing your own thing for, the past few decades. That can, I think, be overwhelming, but both for us and for them. But again, it goes back to trust and making sure that in the process, each of the local markets they feel like they still have their own voice and they have their own identity at the end of the day. And yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of the financial model was built on advertising. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you go about balancing the user experience of that versus the business.
It's difficult. It's not an easy process, but we found, so actually we did a research piece recently, and it showed, I think there's many things that we can improve on in terms of how we place ads on the site, and to your point, balancing that out with the user experience. So I'm just trying to think through some of the user comments that came through. There is a few users who, yes, they commented saying, it's not that they hate any ad on the page, but particularly when you see an ad that has absolutely no relevance to the content that you're viewing. So if you're on Vogue and you see, I don't know, an advertisement for toilet paper, that you're, what's happening there. But if it's an ad for the latest Chanel perfume, or an ad for, I don't know, a link to, if it's a see now, buy now collection for Burberry, and there's an external link that takes you to, say, the Burberry site, and you can shop that collection. I think there's definitely better ways in which you can, reach essentially the same aim at the end of the day. Even visually, so ads that, from a color palette perspective, if it works more nicely on the page than being this jarring thing that's attached to your bottom of your screen, that does that help answer your question?
How would you go about, would that be like an algorithm thing then, in terms of the relevance?
So I guess the first, in terms of actual implementation. Yeah. So we don't have anything similar to that, basically. What we've started doing is getting, again, a more like a user perspective on how to surface ads on the front end and how to do that best. But I imagine, I can't comment on the technical implementation because we haven't done it yet, but I'm sure there's ways around that. Yeah.
Do you, with a new product, you start out with a budget or a target ROI or some sort of financial figure in mind?
It depends on the project. So sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Condé is, it's a big organization, so money is, I don't know if I can say that on camera. It's different from working with a startup, sorry. But yeah, I would say it largely depends on the project and whether it's actually consumer facing or a back-end tool. So sometimes you have a lot of investments that are just focused on making the lives of your editors better and allowing them to produce better content. It depends.
I keep you going on that this and just stop.
Oh.
You mentioned the notion of MVP isn't really a new thing, so it's very similar to how you work on a B2B product where people just want the complete thing out there because there's a lot of voices. So how have you been able to work with your stakeholders to maybe educate them, or how have you been able to get out MVPs in a more lean approach? Can you
Yeah, that one is difficult because I don't think I haven't been completely successful in. I'm going to be really real here and not. Sometimes I know at talks it's like you're meant to like present this really perfect picture of, you know, this is how we do things, but no, it is difficult, and partially because most of our stakeholders are used to, you know, again that publishing the mindset of you release something and then it's out there, and you can't iterate on it. I guess we try to lean heavily on research. So I recently launched an MVP, and the scope that I put together around it, around that product, and defined, okay, these are the features that we're going to go live with, was based on based on a lot of the research that we did in the past, and a combination of some of the data that was coming in from other market sites. So if we were able to demonstrate that, okay, for a new fashion show's experience, say, these are kind of the primary actions or the main actions that users want to do, expect to do, and that's kind of enough to get it live and to get, because up until the point where you release a product, is you're making so many assumptions about your user, and the one thing that I keep trying to remind everyone, I guess, that's involved is the minute that this thing goes live, those assumptions lessen because we're getting that data in, and yeah.
Do you find yourself that you are, or are taking tests? So the DMT test or any test you do that at all?
So we've done very little of that so far, and that's because most of the products that we've released are very, very recent. So I'd say in the span of the last few months, for my team, it's been the span of 3 weeks, 2 weeks. So not, I don't need that anymore. So not yet, but definitely. And some of the teams have already started to experiment with that, for sure.
I'm thinking that could be a way you can introduce the limiting the traffic and see.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. Yeah.
What's one skill that you wish you had learned earlier that you know now? Or that you don't know now, but you wish you know?
Probably actually touching to that point, I think in order to be a really effective product manager, you need to be really good at getting people on board. This is very Steve Jobs style kind of, but actually it is important to make people buy into what you're selling them. And yeah, I'd say that really. Some of the people that I've looked up to in the product world, or even my bosses and such, I mean, one of what's kind of sets them apart from, I think, other people who work in product is you buy into that dream because they're so articulate in how they say it, and they've already thought ahead about how someone, say, in commercial is gonna react, so they're kind of 4 steps ahead. Yeah.
Do you think the best way of learning that is through experience? Or is there anything that you just try?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I was definitely a lot better than when I first started Condé over a year ago, so yeah. What else?